Alright, what's up? It's Seb from Unison, and welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to show you start to finish how I process the vocals in my original track. Come a little closer. So before we begin, let me show you what it sounds like without processing, and then after the processing we're going to do. So here's without.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
And here's with.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now. Body on body.
Alright, so let's begin. So how it's going to work is I'm going to go through each individual channel of vocals and show you the processing I did on there. So we're going to go through the lead vocals, the reverse vocals, the higher octave vocals, and then we're going to go into the bridge. And I'm going to show you how I process the background vocals and how I pan those and process them differently. How I process the ad-libs, and we're going to go through each channel's individual processing, and then we're going to go through what I did to the entire group. So I send them all to a vocal bus and process all of them as a whole to really bring everything together. And we're also going to go through all the reverbs and delays and different buses I created for that. And after all that, I'm going to actually go into the main session and show you what I did after to create some cool effects in the drop like this one. And these chops here. All right, so let's get started. So let's start with the lead vocals first. So I'm going to mute all the processing here, and let's see what we're starting out with here.
Look up and down, no one's around.
So as you can see, it's lacking a lot of life and brightness and warmth. So number one thing I would recommend is always try to get a really good recording. You want the singer to be in the zone. You want to use a decent quality mic, and you want to make sure there's minimal background noise. So this is a pretty average recording, could have been better. So in this case, we're going to have to do more processing than usual. You may find that you need to do more or less processing. But let me show you what I did here. So first of all, the most important thing is to tune the vocals. So as soon as I drag them in, the first thing I do is put an auto-tune plugin on it. And I just use this simple one. It's very easy to use. Just select the key the track is in. And the retune speed I set to medium, so it's not too obvious. And again, this humanize setting also makes it a little more realistic. So this is what it sounds like tuned.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little.
So it's already decently in tune, but this just fixes those minor errors. The second thing that we do is compress it. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to take care of all the little fluctuations in level that it has throughout the acapella. And it's going to level everything out so it's all smooth. Some vocals you may be working with might have huge fluctuations. And in those cases, you're going to need more compression. As you can see by the waveform here, this one is pretty leveled out already, but we just want to glue everything together and make it more smooth. So we're going to use a light amount of compression. And the settings we have on here, the attack is going to determine how fast the compression kicks in. So in this case, I wanted to kick in pretty much immediately after the vocals start. If you wanted to let in a bit more punch in your vocals, you set the attack slower. But in this one, we set it quite fast to kick in the compression pretty much right away. And then as for the release, for drums, you're going to want to use a shorter release because you want them punchy and tight. But for vocals, usually you want to keep them human and smooth and more transparent. So I set the release to the longest setting so that the needle, as you're going to see, is going to kind of move very slowly and fluidly. And we're going to aim for about 3 to 5 decibels of gain reduction, and we're going to make up for that with the makeup gain so that the level is the same, before we go into it and after we come out of the compressor. So let's hear what this is doing.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
So it's basically just controlling everything a little bit and adding a little bit of tone to it. You can use whatever compressor you want. The glue compressor did fine on this. I would highly recommend the CLA 2A by Waves. It's a great compressor for vocals, but in this case we use this and it worked fine. The next thing that we're gonna do is give the vocals a little bit more life. So what I like to use for that is this plugin here, this vocal enhancer. It basically adds a lot of sizzle and brightness and also cleans out some mud. I'm gonna show you what this does, and then I'm gonna tell you what you can do if you don't have this plugin. So let's see what this is doing here.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
So I found that was about right. So basically what this is doing is cutting out around 200 hertz, 500 hertz, and boosting above 6K hertz. So if you don't have this plugin, you could just use a EQ. You could just cut it around 200, 500, and then with a high shelf, you could boost it above 6K. It'll pretty much have the same effect. This is just easier to use, so I chose to use this. And then, so let's hear with and without this.
Look up and down, look up and look up.
So now we're starting to see some decent differences. The next thing is another vocal enhancer. This one's the JJP by Waves. I like this one because the magic setting really gives vocals life and brightness. So all I did here was put it on the default setting, cranked up the magic, and boosted some highs, and did some de-essing using this to reduce some sibilance. We're going to go through some more de-essing on the entire group later, but this one I just did in this plugin to take care of some harshness.
Look up and down, look up and down, look up and down, look up and down, look up and...
So it gives it a bit of presence, brightness, and a bit more life. So I like this plugin a lot. If you don't have it, you can use, it's pretty much saturation with a little bit of brightness. So you could use any kind of saturator, boost up the drive a little bit, and use an EQ to brighten it up a bit. It does add some width as well. So this plugin's great, but you could use a saturator and EQ to replace it if you don't have this. And the final thing, just to finish it off, is a low cut at 100 hertz. I don't want any bass frequencies in my EQ, in my vocals. So I'm going to EQ those bass frequencies out just at around 100 hertz just to get rid of that mud so it doesn't interfere with my bass later. So now we can hear what it sounds like with all the channel processing.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
So I like to get the dry processing right and get the vocals sounding real nice before I add all the reverbs and delays, because if you do that first, it's going to be harder to hear the subtle differences in the actual original signal of the vocals. So I like to get this right first and then move on to the time-based effects later. So let's move on to this reverse vocal. Now for the rest of the vocals, the reverse vocal, high vocals, every single other channel, I start off with the same 4 plugins. So the auto-tune, compressor, and these 2 vocal enhancers. So to save CPU, I've printed them onto the file. So what we're going to go through is just everything I did differently from the first channel. So all of the other ones will have these already on it. We're just going to go through stuff that I did additionally to treat specific vocals. So this is a reverse vocal that just helps introduce the main verse.
Look up and down.
And how I made this, if you don't know how, is I just took this, I put it onto a new channel with a reverb set to 100% wet. I bounced it, and then I reversed the reverb and made it line up like this. I might do another tutorial going over how to do that, but it's pretty simple. It's just reverse vocal. So what I did to make this a bit different is I low cut it a bit more. The main vocals are cut around 100 hertz. This one I cut around 300, just to make it a bit different. And then also I wanted it a bit wide to create some contrast, so it goes from a wide reverse vocal into more of a centered main vocal. So to do that, I used a technique called the Haas effect. You can either put this on a bus or directly on the channel. For this, I put it directly on the channel, so it's just any delay plugin will do. You set the left delay to 15 milliseconds, the right to 30 milliseconds, and then make sure the feedback is set on 0, and the dry and wet is 100%. So this just pushes it out to the sides and creates a nice effect. And the final thing I did differently is added a ping pong delay to this. So I wanted the transition to be a little bit more smooth into the vocals, so this ping pong delay helps the tail carry on a little bit and makes that transition smooth. So you can hear it like this. Little ping pong delay. So that only happens going into the verses of the vocals when they come in. And that's a really cool effect you can use just to prepare your listeners, let them know that the vocals are coming in instead of just bringing them in out of nowhere. So I usually use this on all my tracks. The next thing we're going to go through is the high vocals. So in the second part of the verse, the vocals get layered, so you can hear it like this.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to.
So basically over here, she just sang the same thing an octave higher, dragged it in. And all I did differently for this is low cut it a little bit more and a little bit more sharp of a low cut here to take out those low end frequencies. Since this is a higher octave, I want it to take care of that frequency range. I don't want any body to it. So that's what we did differently, like that. And then again, layered, it sounds like this.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
And that's how we do it for the first verse. So in the actual track, it sounds like, well, we're going to go through the reverbs and delays in a second, but I'll play the original track for you so you can see how it sounds like in context.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now. Body on body, time to get naughty. Come a little closer to me now. Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now. Body on body, time to get naughty. Come a little closer to me now.
All right, so let's move on to the processing in the bridge here. And this is where some background vocals come in and there's a lot more layering. So let's go through this. So what it sounds like in the actual track is this.
Touch you, feel you, make love with you.
Okay, so the processing on the lead vocal is the same.
Touch you, feel you.
Same with the reverse. Now, this is where it gets different. So in this one, we bring in two background vocals that are the same lyrics, but two different takes. And I've panned one of them all the way left and one all the way right just to create that width. So here's what it sounds like.
Touch you, feel you.
And since they're different takes, there's very subtle differences in where they're placed, so that also helps create some width. If you wanted to do it artificially, you could use a doubler plugin, but in this case we got two good takes, so we could do this. And for these ones, since they're pushed out all the way to the side, I don't want any low frequencies, so I've low cut them quite high at 500 hertz. And remember, everything has these 4 plugins on it already. I just bounced them to save CPU, so This is just what's different from other than these plugins. So I low cut them at 500, push them out to the sides, and then we also have this little layer that comes in to emphasize these certain parts here. And for this, since it's very background and just for emphasis, I low cut it pretty sharp at 500. I found it was a bit harsh at 2.5K, so let's see. So that just helps push it behind the other vocals. This is a good frequency to cut for kind of background vocals, and then I use the same width trick that we talked about on the reverse vocals to make it wider and make it a bit different from the other vocals. So altogether, this part sounds like this. Touch you, feel you, make love with you. All right, so now that we've gone through the processing on all the individual channels, we're going to go through the group processing and then finally the reverb and delays. So we're in this section where everything's playing together, so it's going to be the best to see the group processing. So in Ableton, you can just group everything together. In Logic and FL, you can create a bus and send all the vocal tracks to it, and then place plugins on that bus to affect everything. So here we go. So first of all, I wanted to saturate the entire group. This is my favorite saturator. Anything will do, but this one's just really nice. It has a lot of warmth to it and works really well for pretty much any sound, and has different settings. So I set it on the E setting, which is more of a bright and present setting. First, let's see what it sounds like with and without, and then I'll go through the settings here. So here's without, and here's with. So pretty massive difference here. So I cranked up the drive to 3.5. So you don't want to go too much to make it distort, so this was the perfect amount. And then also it has this brightness knob here, so add a little bit more brightness using that, and that's about it for that. The next thing we do on the whole group is use this SDRR plugin. It's kind of like a compressor and saturator in the same thing. So I like this preset here called Master Mix Glue. Has a bit of drive, and these settings just make it sound really nice. So here it is with and without. Little more of a subtle difference, but still brings everything together. And the reason we're doing group processing is just to kind of glue everything together and make it all sound uniform, as opposed to just individual tracks on their own. And it really helps kind of glue in the levels and background vocals together. So it's a good idea to do some group processing. And also to take care of any sibilance, I just de-essed the whole group. So basically all sibilance, like S sounds, this kicks in and it's gonna reduce those sounds so there's no harshness. So here is what it sounds like. Touch you, feel you. So all the F and S sounds, this takes care of it. This is the best de-esser I've found. It's really nice. You just bring down the threshold and takes care of any harshness that you need. And the final thing on the whole group is just, again, make sure there's no real low-end frequencies to interfere with my bass. So I cut it off at 120 hertz. And also I found that the group as a whole was a tiny bit muddy. So I dipped around 200 hertz. So we can see what that's doing. Touch you, feel you. So just cleaning up that low end a little bit. So that's the raw processing on the entire vocals. Now we're going to really take it to the next level with some reverb and delays. So let's go to this section here where we can hear it clearly. Ow, look up and down. No. So that's, as you can see, it has a little bit of kind of that sizzle reverb from this plugin here, but we're gonna add some more strong reverbs as well through buses. I've mentioned this in other videos before. You don't want to place your reverb directly on the vocal channel because it actually takes away from the original recording. The more you set the wet, the more it'll take away from the dry signal. But if you place it on a bus and send it to it, you're blending the 100% dry signal. You're keeping this intact, and you're just adding the reverb standalone like this. You're just adding the full wet reverb to it, so it results in a much cleaner and higher quality sounding vocal, and any sound in general. So let's see what it sounds like without first, and then with all the time-based effects, and then I'm going to go through them one by one and show you how I did it.
Look up and down, no one's around.
So that's without, here's with.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
So it really helps fill in the gaps between the vocals and give it some space and help it mix into the track better. So let's go through the effects one by one here. So the first thing I have is a general reverb. And for this, I used a hall reverb with a slight pre-delay. And what this does is it makes the reverb kick in 58 milliseconds after the vocals hit. So it allows that initial transient of the vocals to come through before kicking in. So I like to do that on vocals just so it prevents it from getting too washy. And I set the decay time to around 3 seconds. And I've sent all the vocals to this in varying degrees. Well, actually, most of them are sent the same amount, except for the reverse vocal. We used a different reverb to create some contrast. So that's the settings on the reverb. And now we're going to go through some cool things that you can do. And the good thing about putting your reverb on a bus is that you have the flexibility to do these extra things that I'm going to go through now, which you couldn't do if you just had it on your direct channel. So I saturate my reverbs just to make them a bit more, give them a bit more life and more space. So let's solo the reverb on its own and hear this. So it's the same setting of the decapitator that I put on the vocal bus. You can use any saturator to saturate your reverbs. And then something else I do is I low cut my reverb. So I don't want any, for this case, I low cut it quite high at 800. Usually I'll low cut my reverbs around 300 to 500, but in this case, there's no need for the low end in the reverb. So we can see what it's doing here. So you can hear all that unnecessary mud, which if we don't have it, look what it does.
Look up and down, no one's
Absolutely makes the mix muddy. So this is a huge way to clean it up.
Look up and down.
And also just to take away some of the high end of the reverb, I high cut it around 6500. And then this is a pretty advanced trick that I use and you can use that basically we sidechain the reverb to the vocals. So when the vocals are in action, the reverb is going to be ducking and it's going to be more present only in the gaps between the vocals. So it creates kind of like a pumping effect. And how we do that is we put a compressor with a sidechain setting on the reverb bus, set the ratio quite mildly to 1.3 usually. And then we set the release pretty smooth so it's not too choppy. And then we bring the threshold down until it has the effect that we want. So let's solo this.
Look up and down, no one's around.
So as you can see by watching this, as the vocals are in action, the reverb is lowering in level. And when when there's a gap in between, the reverb's coming in stronger.
Look up and down, no one's around.
So it kind of gives it some movement and makes it a bit less stale of a reverb. So I really like doing that. So again, we have the main reverb, which is a hall reverb with a bit of pre-delay, 3 seconds of decay. And then we saturate the reverb to give it some life. And then we low cut it to get rid of that mud. High cut it to make it not as bright so it doesn't interfere with the vocals too much. And we do this side chaining trick to give it some movement and kind of fill in the gaps a bit more effectively. The second thing that we have is the long reverb, which is only active on the reverse vocals, because this is more of a transitionary effect. So I wanted the tail to last longer, and I sent it stronger into the reverb. And for this, we don't have the sidechain pumping effect, but we have the same settings here. Well, actually, we have the exact same settings, except I just sent it harder, and we don't have the sidechain to the main vocals. So this is what it sounds like. So that just helps that transition over there. So the next thing we have is a delay, and this is going to help create some width for the vocals and also fill in the gaps. So here's what it sounds like.
Look up and down.
And for this, I use the Echo Boy. I use this Dirt Echo preset. Pretty much any echo will do. And this is basically just a 1/8 delay with decent amount of feedback. I low cut it to make sure there's no low frequencies, and it basically just helps create some width and fill in the gaps.
Look up and down, no one's around.
And then last but not least, I've sent all the vocals to a width bus. And this is a bus you can make to pretty much make anything wider. And the first thing I've put on it is the Haas effect, the same thing I showed you how to do with the reverse vocal, except this time it's on a bus. So very short delay on the left and right side, feedback sent to 0, and 100% wet. So basically what this does is creates a very subtle difference between the left and right side of the stereo field, which kind of tricks your ears into thinking something is wider. So it's really effective to use. And just to make it even wider, I put this ozone imager on it, cranked everything to 100% width. And then again, on the sides of the mix, I don't want any low frequencies, so I low cut it at 100. And then I use this saturator just to give it a bit more life. So here's what the width bus sounds like. So as you can see, it's completely wide. And when we mix it in with the original vocals, it really helps fill it out.
Look up and down, no one's around.
So with the width bus, delay, reverb, and this long reverb, which is only present on the reverse vocals, here's where we're at right now.
Look up and down, no one's around. Come a little closer to me now.
And that's it. That's how I process these vocals. It's how I took it from sounding kind of lifeless, dull, into giving it some brightness, space, movement, and some real life, which really came together in the original track here.
Closer to me now. Come a little closer to me now. Body and body, time to get naughty.
All right, so now that we've done this, I'm gonna go into another session where I processed kind of these unique vocals, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So we're going to go through how to do these kind of effects. So that deep sounding vocal, and I'm going to go through some stuff that I did in terms of reverb and delay automation and stuff like that. So I'll be back in just a sec. All right, so here we go. So basically I processed those vocals as I showed you in a separate session, and then I dragged them back into the original session I was working on with all the different instruments and stuff. I've bounced them down into a full track with no vocals just to save CPU here. And this is where I got a bit creative with the drop and did some cool stuff. So this is what we're going to go over how to do. We're going to go through how to do these kind of effects. Alright, so let's check this out. So first I'm going to go through the dry effects, and then we're going to go through all the reverbs and automation that I did. So to create that kind of deep vocal effect, I use this plugin called Little Alter Boy. And all you do is adjust the formant setting on it, which is really cool. So this is what it does. So it worked really well for this track. Some other stuff I did here is I added a bit of a simple delay, just to make it a bit different from the other vocals, and a tiny bit of reverb on the actual track. A bit of harshness was at 11.9K, so I dipped that. And I also dipped some high. These are very minor things that I did at the end, but just to go through them. And then also the vocals are sidechained to the kick. So here I've also automated this effect here, so we can check it out here. So it kind of comes back to the original tone over here for these chops. And so what I did here was I just took this original sample and I duplicated this part of it. To fit the track. And then at the end, just to create some variation, I transposed the last note one higher. And then as for the chops, I just took one of the syllables and chopped them into a rhythm. And now here's where things get pretty cool. So I've created two buses for reverb and delay and really automated them to create a cool effect. So if you look here, if you look at this effect here, you can see what it's doing. So you can see where the reverb fills in this gap, gets panned, and then cuts out here. So let's go through this. So we're using a Hall reverb again, we're saturating it again, and this is where the things get a bit different. So I've also cut it on the low end and high end like we did before, but I've put an auto pan plugin on the actual reverb, which is really cool. So you can hear it going from left to right on the actual reverb itself. And what I've done is I've sent the reverb to it 100%, and I've automated the level of the actual reverb track to activate only when I want. So as you can see, it comes in here, cuts out very, this enables you to control it a lot better. If you have it sent 100%, use the level, because you can cut it out 100% without it carrying on really easily. And you can hear it again here. And then again here. So I basically copy pasted this pattern and I changed it up a bit here for the chops. This really helps give your mix some movement and bring it all together. And then I did the same thing for a delay bus. So I placed a delay, the same one that we had on the vocals, 1/8, and then saturated it and did the same thing with the auto pan. So here's what it sounds like. And then here's what it sounds like on the actual vocal. I basically just automated it to taste throughout the track, brought it stronger during transition points, and it really helped give this track kind of a unique feel. I'd learned this technique pretty much right before I made the track, so I used it quite a bit. You might not want to go as extreme, but in this case it worked pretty well. So basically just use the formant to bring down the vocals on here, and then use these full delay and reverb automations with the auto pan to really create some movement and create some cool effects. So here's what it sounds like. And then without, so you can see it's missing that little panned reverb effect. And then something else I did on the bus for these chops is I wanted to make them a bit wider and less dry. So I added this very short delay. It's a very short delay on the left and right side, and it basically just fills in the gaps a bit. And then over here, I did something else that's kind of cool. This is the last thing we're gonna go over. I automated the little altar boy to adjust the formant coming into the second drop. So how I did that was I took the little altar boy and I adjusted the formant to come in like this. And again, I did that pan effect there using that reverb automation. So that's about it. That's how I processed the vocals from start to finish, how I brought them into the main session and created some cool effects using formant shifting and pan automation on reverbs and delays. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you can use these techniques to take your vocals to the next level, really give them some life, some brightness, some energy and space and movement. So if you enjoyed this video, just click the like button below, leave a comment, let me know if you have any questions. And also, our vocal series is coming on Tuesday, February 5th, and that's going to be really cool. It's going to be just a pack full of professional quality vocals that you can drag straight into your track, and you can use these same processing techniques on them. So if you want to get early access, you can click the first link in the description to sign up for that, so you'll get notified when it's released. And there's going to be some cool bonuses and discount for the first week, so you're going to want to sign up if you want to be notified for that. Yeah, so again, this is Sep from Unison. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.